today I'm outside St Maelruin's church here in Tallaght village, and I'd like you to meet Canon William Deverill. If he ever appears today, that is. Aha, here he comes, and a great big smile on his face as always. William, I'm delighted to be back here in St Maelruin's. Any chance you might just give me a look around and tell me a little of the history?
Yes. So if you like to come in here. Now the first thing I'd say to you is, this isn't where the rector has been on holidays, but it's where the immigrants have come over the last 23 years that I am here in Tallaght. When I arrived, there was nobody younger than myself and no children, because people had moved out from Crumlin 50 years ago and their children had grown up. But fortunately, 20 plus years ago, the immigrants arrived, and we've been blessed with Africans and Indians. And that's why I have the Nigerian flag and the blue spot in our own tricolour for Gandhi's spinning wheel. I know the Indian tricolour runs the other way. And in fact, here we have Doubting Thomas, and they call him St. Thomas of India, because they believe that he brought the faith to India, to Kerala or Kerala in the very south of India. And therefore, if you see a nurse, an Indian nurse up in the hospital, she most likely is wearing a cross. She's actually Christian, where you might presume she'd be Hindu. So you'll recall that the original crest for Dublin was 3 burning castles. The new Dublin one you can see here is 1, but in the middle of it is St Maelruin's Missal and Cross. And I think it's great that Tallaght gets such a shout in the new Dublin crest. While I happen to be a canon of Christ Church Cathedral, and they claim to be the spiritual heart of the city, and rightly so with Woodquay behind them, I tell them they're only 1,000 years old compared to the 1200 of Tallaght. Going back to the land of saints and scholars, when Tallaght and Finglas were the eyes of Ireland. And you can see why we were the land of saints and scholars. St. Ingus came incognito here, he was so famous. And St. Maelruin's Missal, that is the actual size of it, a little prayer book. And you can see 1 illuminated page. It's in the Royal Society on Dawson Street. And the reliquary or box is above the door in the National Museum. And then you can go right back through the centuries to when Tallaght really was a little country village. You can see here that the present 200-year-old church doesn't feature, because the medieval church is attached to the tower, or rather the tower is attached to the church, and therefore 500 years old. When you come in the church gate, there's a building on your right which is in this picture and therefore must be older than the church, the present church, and that is the stables. And before the motor car, you'd have come to church with your pony and trap, and there are very narrow stalls for the ponies because, of course, it was only for 1 hour. And here you can see the circular site. And that's the reason we're on the bend, if not quite round it. And all the way round, there is a circular waterless ditch, the fosse. And if you go round to the back of Smith's toy shop, you will actually see a rampart with a FROGRA, a National Monuments Notice. Here on our right, we have the collection pan, and it's not a bedpan. And it's 200 years old, older than the church, and we're actually using it again because of COVID. You can see here our old organ, and when I arrived it died. It would really a country church with a little harmonium of a keyboard. Apparently you need wide keyboards for the modern hymn, preferably 2 in the pedals acting as a third. So it would have cost twice as much to repair as to replace with a modern digital organ. Now, it's not electronic. You cannot tell the difference in sound. In fact, we put the big coffee table speakers behind and people assume the music's coming out of the organ. Here we have the font, and the reason it's inside the church door is so when the child comes in, it's immediately welcomed into the family of God. You're not actually baptized into a particular denomination. As long as you're baptized with water and the Trinity, in the name of the Trinity, most churches will recognize it. You can see this has a cover on it, and with us, you might be used to pray for the soul of in a pew, where we have to the glory of God, but in memory of a relative. In this case, it's in memory of two choir boys who died because, of course, the choir stalls are just here beside us, the original ones in front of the old organ. So here we have a tablet to Allington, and of course you know that the Allington estate is opposite the old mill pub, or what was Bridget Burke's. Here in the middle we have of the west window, and we're very fortunate that the tower isn't attached to the back of the church and gives us all this light. And you can see a sample of Evie Hone's work. Now, she would have been the equivalent of Harry Clark, and what they were doing in the 1930s was so vibrant you'd think it was done in the 70s. She would be disgusted that we have that because she had thrown it out. The other tablet is behind the organ to Hancock, and he wrote the original history of Tallaght, and I have a paperback copy of it there. This is a church that was built by Semple, and he also built Kintiernan and Whitechurch, and you can see it is a simple country church, except we stripped the plaster off a good 50 years ago and revealed the rubble from the old church. The beautiful finished stone is on the outside, and Semple never expected us to reveal the rubble, so to speak. But in an age of concrete, people love to see a bit of stone. But they were brave enough to paint it terracotta and cream, which warmed it up. And believe it or not, when I arrived 20 years ago, they put down a red carpet. And then here on your right, you're probably used to pray for the soul of. Again, we have plaques to the glory of God, and the first one might be to the person who relit the church, and the last one was for hymn books. Sometimes people ask me, was this a confessional before I put a fire escape sign above it? And then of course some wag said to me that maybe a confessional is a form of fire escape. But of course we would have the general confession like yourselves at the beginning of the Mass. So you can see here our modern digital organ. You know the way nobody likes to sit up in the front pews, so we've no bother now filling the front pews because people aren't as self-conscious. And here you have the choir stalls, and of course it's lovely for my son doing the Facebook Live services, because for GDPR he has got the choir's permission. And often we've Africans who sit in the front pew, and we've warned them about GDPR, and they're happy to sit there. When you get up here on the platform, and you're welcome to come up onto the platform, because we only regard the sanctuary as inside the rails. And when you're here, this might remind you of a Roman Catholic church of pre-Vatican II. And the reason is that we are the nearest Protestant church to the Catholic Church. I often say the main difference is that I'm married. You can see with the rails that you get about 16 people round, and 3 or 4 sittings would do. We still have our pulpit. It is low and to the side, and before amplification, you can hear my voice resounding now. There's perfect acoustics. You can see the screen here, the Reardus screen, and the New Testament was written in Greek. So when Christ said that he was the complete, the A to Z, they actually wrote Alpha to Omega, the beginning and the end. And then in the center panel, you can see the wheat for the bread at communion and the grapes for the wine at communion. And then it comes to our windows, and Jesus said that trying to get the good news out there was a bit of a hit and miss affair. It was a bit like the farmer scattering seed, and how some could fall on the hard heart of the path, in the shallow heart of the crevice, or amongst the thorns of materialism, etc. But at the end of time, we can see here that some fell on good land and gave many 100 times the harvest of believers. And you can see the angels reaping the harvest, not with a combine harvester, but with sickles. Here we have the Mothers Union banner. Says you, it's a bit late to tell you of that union, but it was the original parenting course to support young mums trying to rear their families, young children away from the company of their own mothers. And it would still be a very backbone organisation in any parish. We have our original oil lamps, or they used to run all the way down the church till about 100 years ago, till electricity. And the reason that we still have these is you can see they are to the glory of God and in memory of somebody. So that's how come we have the freestanding ones either side. You can see here some older versions of the Bible, Revised Standard Version, and a copy of the Bible in Irish with an illuminated page, and also service sheets and a CD in Irish. But behind it on the wall we have a tablet, a bit like Pray for the Soul of, but it's in memory of Canon Francis Robert Alexander. And he was the rector here when in the 1970s there was a population explosion with people coming out to the new city of Tallaght. And he was extremely ecumenical, and his children are still about. They would now be probably retired, his sons. His daughter has died out in New Zealand, and just some people might recall him. And when I talked about the population explosion, this is the reason they put in the usherette seats all the way down the side aisles. And you can see that they're good enough to support me. And when you stand up, they flip out of the way, which let people walk out safely. You can see here with the pulpit that you're able to project your voice, and people can see you and you can see them. I think it also shows the reason that we've held on to it is the emphasis on explaining the scriptures. You're probably used to seeing a priest preach from the elbow or lectern, but I will admit now, if there are children out, I tend to preach from the aisle. But all through the lockdown, I would have preached from here. And certainly it is nice to be able to see and engage with people.